Thank you so much, Terry. Truly, what we have is this moment. And in this moment, I have the distinct honor of introducing our guest speaker this morning, who is asked to be introduced simply as a peace pilgrim. We all know this man. If we don't, you soon will. For those of you who have not had the honor of meeting him, you will. Swami, thank you.
Om Namah Shivaya. Om. Good morning. Good morning. It's very good to be with you. I heard from Hazel a little over a month ago about the possibility of joining you today, and very, very grateful. And thank you for the beautiful, inspiring song. Sage Willie, my goodness, how's that? That's a wow. So the topic this morning is bondage and freedom, or we can say the path from bondage to freedom. So we'll discuss some. And in Vedanta, in the learning Vedanta, the teaching of Vedanta, which is the Sanskrit, the Eastern tradition, Vedanta meaning the highest teaching, dealing with questions such as who am I, and what is this world, and what is our connection with each other, and like this. Much of the teaching is with allegory, or allegories are used, I should say. And the reason is, if the teacher just speaks the truth, then they sit like Ramana Maharshi often did, which is just in silence. And for us neophytes, we might find it's not so helpful. Or they might say something like this, all is God. And we can nod and feel a resonance with that, but still somehow. So allegories are used, and I'll share one with you this morning, a good one, a fun one. One of the most popular, maybe the most popular, is the snake in the rope. Has anyone heard that one? Okay, we have a few very good. Okay, that's for a future time. But that's that's a good one. This one speaks to bondage and the nature of bondage. So here's the story. In India, of course, there's a great desert. The Gobi Desert is a great desert, and it's massive. Has anyone ever seen? Has anyone ever flown over it or anything? Okay, so the big deserts, the deserts in Arabia or any of that, we've seen them, we can imagine them. So in the ancient times and still today, there are merchants who ride camels. It's really the only way to cross the desert in some of these extended travels other than flying. And the travel is days, 3 days, 4 days, something like that. And sometimes they'll have routes in many days. And the one telling the story will remind us that the camels, how do I say this lovingly? They're not so bright. And so the camel driver needs to stop over for the night and sleep. And the camel, if it's not tied down, will wander off. Now, you can picture that, and what will happen with the camel driver in the morning when the camel has wandered off. Yeah, in the middle of the desert, it's not so pretty. And then the question is, so how to tie down the camel? Because if it's not tied down, it'll wander off. Who wants to take a shot? There's no post. Oh,
You tie it to yourself.
ah. So that's a good one. I like that. In a way. So here's what they do. This is actually what they do. The driver has a rope, a long rope, and they make a big production out of wrapping it around the neck of the camel and tying it up. And then they, honest to God, and then they bend down to the feet of the camel, just out of eyesight of the camel, and they make a big production of okay? And then they tell the camel with full faith, and Dr. Holmes will teach of full faith, yes? With full faith, okay, that's it. Now you're tied up, you can't go anywhere. And that's it. And now they go to sleep, they rest, they wake up. Guess where the camel is? So this allegory is used to help point to what the cause of bondage is for us. Now bondage is interesting, or being tied down, especially if we consider it in that light. First, it's a common experience, isn't it? How many of us have felt trapped? Either in a, right? Either in a difficult relationship with a terrible person, an abusive person, a bad job, in a place that we don't want to live like this, in a situation that we don't love. How many? Yeah, we don't need to do. We know it's everyone. And so, ultimately, in Vedanta, we deal with this. And Dr. Holmes is there. We were talking a little bit earlier about Dr. Holmes' teaching, and the question was, am I a student of? I have read Science of Mind. And honestly, it's universal teaching. Sage Willie, as you pointed out, also universal teaching. Also universal teaching. And Vedanta, the same. So to hear that the bondage is actually within ourselves instead of outside of ourselves is very interesting, and we'll process it in different ways at different times. But this is actually the teaching, is that the only thing that's binding us is an idea that we're bound. A persistent idea that we're bound. Persistent idea, we could say, of lack, that we're missing something. And you know, it's not even an idea so much as a feeling. Often when we hear these teachings, we'll think, well, I'm not walking around thinking I'm the body, which is true. But we're walking around living as if we are, which is even more pernicious, even more pervasive, even more challenging. Because if it were a thought, we would simply replace the thought. But it's many thoughts. It's interconnected, it's interwoven, interrelated. But Vedanta would say, actually, though, that is the issue, that the bondage is, we could channel Dr. Holmes, the bondage is thinking that we're bound. And freedom is thinking that we're free. And he would say, without a doubt, thinking that we're free without a doubt, without a counter thought, without any other thought about it. Because if there's no counter thought, since thought creates our reality, then if I think I am free, I'm free. Interesting, isn't it? So to try to bring some practicality to it, there are some examples that came as we were driving over this morning. Because we're not dealing with a repetitive thought, we're actually dealing with a feeling. It's in Sanskrit, there's a word, ahamkara. Ahamkara means ego. And ego. And so we have ego sense, which is really a feeling of being separate, or a feeling of lack, or a feeling of missing out, a feeling of being incomplete. It's not real. We call it an effect of Maya. It's avidya, or ignorance, or primal nescience, like this. It's a feeling. And in the company of this feeling, here's what happens, and we can play this out. Let's say we're just living, and we're just in the day-to-day of life. Have you ever experienced this? And you're talking with a dear friend, and you say something that the dear friend misunderstands your intent on. Have you ever had that happen? and they get upset. And they say something back to you. Has that ever happened? And now you get upset. And you say something back to them. Yes? And after a while, has it ever happened that you both get very angry with each other and you say terrible things to each other? And then you get up and you say to yourself, you know, this person's always been like this. And you start playing stories in your mind about how they've always been like this. Yes? They're just a terrible person. I can't associate with them anymore. I really had it. That's it. And this can happen, you know, with a partner, someone that you've only known a few weeks. It can happen with someone that you've been with, husband or wife, for a few years, 40 years, 50 years, yes? And what happens is when this plays out, and then especially when we say that's it, what happens within the psyche? There's a knot. This is Thich Nhat Hanh. He addresses it this way, and it's really a beautiful way. In yoga, we call it a scar, but we can say, or blockage. So we can say a knot, and a knot is tied inside. A knot is tied inside the psyche. Now, how do you know the knot is there? Well, the next time you think about that person or see that person, what do you experience? Right. And by the way, how long do you have to remind yourself that you don't like them? Because there's something in you that's also saying, give it up already. Is it so? Is there something saying, enough of this? Just let it go, forgive them, be done with it, forget about it? Yes, do we experience that too? Life is funny. And so, and if we don't, every time we revisit it, if you think of this knot creating a blockage. It's an energetic blockage. It's a thought blockage and an energetic blockage. Can we relate? Does that make sense? And it's a stoppage of the free flow of spirit, as it were, of the free flow, of free-flowing life. And there, when it hits that, it stops, as it were. So it's blocked, bound, and we feel trapped. When we feel trapped in a situation with a person, it's only because we're with a person that we have a lot of knots with. Because who is the person really? You see, if we see the person really, truly, as spirit, as soul, as we're wishing to see ourselves and as we're wishing to see all, then what's the problem? Right? So this is where we get caught up. This is where we get caught up. And this bondage, for practically speaking, is like this. Let's say that there's a pretty guy or a handsome man. And we're just fine with our partner. We're just fine. We've had some problems. We'd have some bumps. We have a lot of knots by now. And then we see a pretty girl or a handsome guy. And it seems so innocent. You know, and all of a sudden these thoughts come forward about, And let's say we have a sexual relationship in the mind, in the brain, and we say, well, it's only in the mind, it's no big deal. You know, it's just that, and I didn't really do it. But you see the knot that comes? Jesus used to talk about this, he said, and that was a hard one to understand. It was a very hard one for me to understand, that's for sure. But I tied a lot of knots. And so the knot is tied there, and let's say that the thoughts go a certain direction, and, you know, and there's a voice inside saying, it's okay, it's not a big deal, you know, my partner really is this, and, oh, wow, this could be amazing, and there's a voice. And then, oh my God, food. Food. One that we're dealing with all the time, our relationships with food. You see? We smell something, we think of something, we salivate? Not. And all these knots, these become the persona. Money? Who has enough money? Who has plenty of money? Okay, thank you. I don't have any, which turns out to be plenty. That's about the only way to deal with it. It's all God's. It's a form of God. It's a form of energy. So this is really the bondage. Just practically speaking, this is the bondage. We're not bound outside. We think that we're bound outside. We think it's that person. We think it's that job. Does this make sense? We think it's this person or this job or this situation or, oh my God, the weather here is terrible. And we're caught up in a thinking that something else will be better, as if something else will magically make us happy forever. This is Maya, by the way. And Maya, by the way, is a form of God. When we realize that, that's pretty freaky. That we're never apart, we're always in spirit, as it were. And so, but it works this way. If you were to design some way to separate us, you would see that since we are unity, since we're actually one, the only way you could really separate us is make us think that we're separate. And that's Maya. That's Maya. So the creator, the creatrix who wants to create this world, in order to create a world of duality from unity, since there's only unity, will have to help us to think that we're separate, to feel that we're separate, to feel that we're alone and incomplete and like this, which creates spiritual path, because spiritual path is coming back from that place of feeling separate and alone to understanding unity, to feeling unity, to recognizing the essential unity within us. And what we discover is in our paths, we can go one direction or the other, and it starts and ends with the thoughts. Yes, actions are involved. Yes, speech are involved. But really the transformation from duality to unity, transformation from bondage to freedom is an inside job. We become free within ourselves. Not free outside. The only way to have freedom outside is to be free within ourselves. And we mean here capital S self. The God self, the spirit self, the intuitive self, the real self, the eternal self, the unchanging self, the wisdom self, the Ananda self, the bliss, the forever bliss that we've been seeking is really the capital S self. Ananda, Anandoham we say in Sanskrit. Shivoham, Anandoham. I am that Shiva, I am that absolute, I am that bliss. I am that wisdom. I am that knowledge. I am not separate from God. I and the Father are one. Truth. And yet we found ourselves separate, and that's bondage. When we're separate, we're bound. That's the bondage. And it's the little things, seemingly little things, that bind us. Does that resonate in some way? It's the little, it's how we're processing the events of the day. And it's only ignorance. It's not that anyone's bad or mean or even though there's so many terrible acts in the world, it doesn't start there. It starts so simply because we feel ourselves to be separate, and then we act upon it, and then the knots come, and more knots, and more knots, and more knots, and then we feel trapped. Oh my God, we feel so trapped at times, yes? It's horrible. And the way out is to turn it around. The way out is the way we got in. The mind is not our enemy. It behaves as one when it's in the company of and ruled by the feeling of being separate. The mind is both friend and enemy based upon who the mind puts on the altar. If the mind puts the ego sense on the altar and worships the ego sense, the feeling of being separate, then it's as if an enemy. This is Bhagavad Gita. If it places the Christ on the altar, the intuitive self, the capital S self, the wisdom, God, Brahman, Allah. If it places that on the altar, the light, and worships that, and listens to that, and studies that, and really interrogates, then it goes that direction. So it said that there are two paths here. One path leads towards bondage, and the other leads towards freedom. And we're all seeking this freedom. And so really it's about changing the thoughts, just that, and learning to recognize the difference between thoughts, thought patterns, behaviors that are detrimental, that cause bondage. And when it contributes to our bondage, it supports bondage around us as well. Or choosing thoughts, behaviors, speech, etc., that lead towards freedom. It's, in this way, it's simple. And ultimately, freedom is knowing who you are and not forgetting, living in it, abiding in it. Ultimately, this is freedom. And you know, since it's who we are, of course, everyone can do it. In closing, I would just like to share from a great saint. Her name is Swami Lalitananda. And she's so practical. She left the body not long ago, but we found out about her and love to share her teachings. She gives 10 points on how to transform our life, and that's what we're talking about, is how to transform our life. And I'll just read them and share, and if we remember a few, that's amazing. If there are a couple of them that resonate, one or two. She says these 10 guidelines. Depend upon yourself and make the maximum self-effort for your goal every day. Do not be spasmodic in your spiritual practice. Study scripture under the guidance of a teacher and reflect upon it. Your efforts in study will not be in vain. The results will surprise you. Although the mind may seem bored, continue to persevere every day. Practice at least 15 to 20 minutes exercise every day. Be in nature as much as possible. Observe with a keen mind not only other people's, but your own peculiarities and the fallacies of your mind, so the things that we hold on to. Let your mind remain open as the arms of the oak tree that welcomes it to all types of weather and creatures of the forest. But take caution, see and act with discrimination and dispassion. Control your sentiments for the pleasures of the world. Beware attachment. Understand the futility of shallow and superficial love. And having risen above the body, reach for the divine love of God that will carry you beyond the despair of the world process and its ensnaring entanglements. Overcome the negative functions of the mind in terms of doubt, fear, shyness, grief, pride, selfishness, and love for the pleasures of the senses. Overcome these by directing your mind to the creative horizons of your inner life. Developmental detachment from family and friends. This one's so easily misunderstood. We're just talking about the body. Get to know them in spirit. Avoid bad company, unnecessary talking, and keep good association or satsanga. So find a way. It exists. Develop increase in concentration of mind and meditate on God, and keep your goal of enlightenment, self-realization, freedom. In Sanskrit, mumukshutva, burning desire for freedom brings the way to us. Keep that goal before your view. Know that you can do it. Listen to Dr. Holmes. If you're a student of Dr. Holmes, listen. He tells you you can do anything you choose to do. True? Yes. And the way. So keep the goal in front of you. Never let anything or anyone get in the way. Okay. So you are by nature free. You are by nature free. You are by nature full and complete, not separate. It's true. So it's not easy, but if you choose, you will be free. Okay. God bless us, everyone. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you. Make a beautiful day.
And so we can anchor that inspirational message from Swami in affirmative prayer. As we were so beautifully reminded by the Swami's message, it is all God. Absolutely everything, everywhere. It is God in the faces that we see around us. And as we recognize that and allow Spirit to flow freely through us, we become more each moment of who and what we truly are. And what we are those God qualities of love, compassion, kindness, caring. And as we practice that, we recognize that in ourselves and in one another. And so with great gratitude, I release these words into the law, and we affirm them by saying, and so it is.
So it is.